Now, some housekeeping remarks. The webinar, as always, will be recorded. We will then post it in the grants section of the IRM website, but without the Q&A section. Please mute yourself when you are not speaking. If possible, please keep your video on. Feel free to ask and respond questions in the chat box during the presentations, and please also present when you speak. The naming convention is your full name and organization, and if you don't see it in the screen, please hover over your name in the participants tab and select rename. So before we start with the presentations, as always, it is a practice in these webinars, the participants will be sent to breakout rooms for a meet and greet exercise. We want to use these webinars not only to get very useful and rich information, but also to have the opportunity to get to know each other. So please introduce yourself by indicating your name, organization, and 1 or 2 sentences about something from yourselves that you would like others to know, like where are you located, what you have done this past weekend that you want to share, what is your experience in the fields of grievance redress mechanisms, etc. Again, thank you very much for joining. We hope you all enjoy the webinar. And now Sukhyung will manage the Zoom breakout room and see you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It was so nice to meet some of you in a small breakout room. I love that idea. It's a nice way to make it more personal, even though we're still sitting in our houses. And again, my name is Angela Miller. I'm one of the heads of our sustainability ESG group within IDB Invest. And I have a lot of slides here. I'm not going to bore you with all of them. I'll just go through some of the highlights here. And Sue has kindly offered to help me with the presentation. So we can go on to the next slide. Thanks so much. So just to give you a bit of background, in 2020, we updated our sustainability policy, our environmental social sustainability policy. We went through a rigorous consultation and engagement program, more than 120 days. It actually lasted much longer, with a variety of civil society groups from Latin America and the Caribbean, and also representatives of clients and other stakeholders. We received over 400 comments, much of which had to do with social issues. A lot of the issues that we're talking about today, about stakeholder engagement, consultation, FPIC, really out of all of the comments we received, the majority had to do with social aspects. And so our old policy was from 2013. The new policy was approved in April of 2020 and went into effect 2021. So last year was really effectively our first year implementing our new sustainability policy. We have a framework, a sustainability framework, so it's not just the sustainability policy, but also consists of our access to information policy, which was updated a few years ago as well. Our IDB Invest exclusion list, which is also new, was part of our policy update. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, our policy refers to IFC performance standards, as well as the World Bank Environmental Health and Safety Guidelines. So the general EHS guidelines, but also the industry specific guidelines. We use those as well. And of course, also compliance with host country laws and regulations. While we do follow the IFC performance standards, since those were from 2012, there were several areas that we updated within the text of our policy. So you'll see, if you take a look at our sustainability policy, I can share the link on the chat later. We go in a little bit deeper and are more explicit on a number of different issues, and in some ways go beyond the performance standards. Just to give you an example, with Indigenous people, we don't just follow PS7, we also have a requirement to protect Indigenous people in voluntary isolation. So there are several areas, especially around gender, for instance, where we also go a bit beyond, or we're much more explicit within the text of the policy. So this just gives you a little bit of a background. Obviously, the MICI is an important part of our sustainability framework. We also have a corporate governance development framework. So the G of our ESG is the corporate governance team. So with that, we can go to the next one. You can go to the next one. So in terms of consultation, you're probably already familiar with Performance Standard 1, the IFC Performance Standard. So all of our consultation requirements are included in Performance Standard 1. But as you can see in the next slide, you can go to the next one, IDB Invest and IDB have done a lot of work distilling what's in the performance standard and really taking it one step further, making it user-friendly templates and guidance for practitioners and clients around what does meaningful stakeholder engagement mean. So we have 2 publications out. The one on the left was an earlier one that was done with IDB and IDB Invest, and the one on the right was one where we're part of a working group with other multilateral finance institutions, and we all have similar requirements, but we often present them in slightly different ways. So this publication on the right was an output of an MFI working group that we have, where we got feedback from the World Bank and other banks, Asian Development Bank and others, to come up with what are the key principles behind meaningful stakeholder engagement. And I would say this is one of our most useful documents when we work with companies, because while these requirements are specified in the performance standards, this is a really user-friendly way to talk about these issues with, in our case, private sector companies in Latin America and the Caribbean. And these are some of the key principles, which are already, I'm sure, very familiar with. This idea that engagement be ongoing and iterative, that it be based on disaggregated stakeholder analysis, that it's equitable and non-discriminatory, that there's prior information available, that there are events tailored to needs of different groups, respectful and free of coercion and intimidation. The issue of being free of risk of reprisals is increasingly important, especially for us in Latin America. That this process be transparent, that there be information publicly disclosed, and that stakeholders have access to grievance mechanisms. So I find these super helpful. If you haven't looked at them, we have the link there, and they can be quite useful. You can go on to the next one. Again, to the next one. And of course, this idea of informed consultation and participation is also explicit within the IDB Invest sustainability policy. For those of you who are aware of the IFC policy, it's quite similar, the language regarding that. You can go to the next one. Similarly, in the new IDB Invest policy, we do go over this idea of broad community support. And as part of our environmental and social due diligence of the projects, we do document whether there's broad community support for a project. That doesn't mean it has to be unanimous support, but that there is broad community support. We can go to the next one. This idea of FPIC, free, prior, informed consent, very explicit in the performance standards under PS7, but also within the body of our IDB Invest sustainability policy. We have also included a section on this, and here are some of the different elements of FPIC. I won't go into a lot of detail on these, and I'd rather open up to discussion later on in the chats if anybody has any questions. You can go on to the next slide. Just to mention, within the IDB Invest policy, something that we did here during our consultation process is the need to also expand our consideration of other vulnerable groups, including Afro-descendants, who in some countries, for instance in Colombia, they have similar rights as Indigenous people in terms of the requirements for FPIC. So we have explicit reference to Afro-descendant populations within our sustainability policy, which is different from the previous version. So with that, I'll close the session and thank you. There are other slides, happy to share all of this later and happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. Over to you, Andrea. You are muted.
Thank you. After all this long time, we still have to be reminded of that. Well, good evening, afternoon, and morning, depending on where you are. It's such a pleasure to be connected with you all today. For those that don't know me, my name is Andrea Repeto, and I'm the head of MICI. Many thanks, Paco, and the IRM for GCF team for the opportunity for us to share a little bit more of the work that MICI does regarding today's topics. I would like to also thank Eva Hayes for coordinating internally at MICI and with IDB Invest colleagues, our MICI and IDB Invest colleagues presenting today, and all of you for taking the time and your interest in these super important topics. MICI, as the independent consultation and investigation mechanism for the IDB group, responds to concerns of environmental and or social harm related to projects financed by the IDB, the public sector lending arm, IDB Invest, the private sector lending arm, and IDB Lab, an innovation laboratory that mobilizes financing, knowledge, develop ecosystems for entrepreneurial solutions of inclusive growth in Latin America and the Caribbean. MICI is part of an ecosystem of risk management and accountability at the IDB group. As such, for MICI to register a complaint, it requires that those raising the concerns have first initiated contact with management to allow for an opportunity for management to try and resolve the issues raised. In the last 2 years, the private and public sector lending arms of the IDB group have created their internal grievance protocols to systematically allow for this opportunity to take place and MICI to be a last resort mechanism. MICI doesn't require from those filing a complaint to establish contact with management if there are fears of reprisals. Our guiding principles, you might know that already, but happy to sort of do a little bit of refresh. We're independent from management. MICI reports to the IDB Group Board of Directors. Address requests efficiently and effectively. We know we have room for improvement on this aspect, and we're working very hard to honor this principle. Be objective, impartial, and transparent. Here, I would like to point out our recent accountability data published on our website, a project that started with my predecessor, and very happy that it has been finalized recently. So I invite you to take a look at that. Work in a cost-effective manner and avoid duplication with other bank independent offices, and reflect the highest professional and technical standards of the IDB group. Now, our process. What does it entail? MICI has a 4-step process when responding to a complaint. We have a registration, eligibility analysis, dispute resolution, which we call consultation phase, but has nothing to do with the consultation topic that we're discussing today, and a compliance review phase. People raising concerns need to understand and decide during MICI's eligibility which one of the 2 phases they would like to activate. Our dispute resolution process, unique in several aspects, and you can ask Martin Pacman questions about this aspect that I'm very fan of, is a 2-step space in which the complainants, the client or executing agency, along with the institution, come to the table voluntarily through a flexible process that is tailored for the specific case. The first step in our dispute resolution process is to assess the conditions for dialogue, and the second is the dialogue space itself for the parties to seek mutually agreeable solutions. Our compliance review process, on the other hand, is a fact-finding exercise to determine whether the IDB group has complied or not with its own environmental and social policies and standards applicable to the project at stake. The process is also a 2-step process in which the first one is determining whether MICI would recommend or not an investigation to take place. And if a recommendation to investigate is approved by the board, then we proceed with an investigation per se. Both our phases offer the possibility to monitor either the agreement reached by the parties or management's action plan approved by the board to implement MICI's recommendation. Now, out of the interventions from both the consultation and the compliance review phases, with cases, MICI has gathered and analyzed lessons learned for the institution. We have continued these efforts that began in 2018 and are reflected on MICI's reflections. As you might know, you might see in some of these publications on our website. In case you're interested, we're currently working on a note regarding consultation and access to information in the compliance review phase, which have been constant concerns in the complaints received, registered and found eligible. We hope by October to have this note out in the public domain. So stay tuned and please ask my colleagues all the questions you might have. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Now over to your colleague, Martin.
Hi, Paco. Hi, everybody. Let me try to share the screen. Let me know if you're being able to see it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So first of all, thanks for the invitation. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time here, just for you to have a glimpse of the 6 of the guiding principles of the consultation phase: co-design, do no harm, good faith, sustainability, voluntary nature, and attention to asymmetries. Of course, all of these guiding principles apply to each of our stages of the DR process, as Andrea said: the evaluation or the assessment process, the dialogue per se, and the monitoring stage if we reach to an agreement. And of course, at least from our experience, co-design and sustainability have been key principles when addressing complaints, and especially when addressing complaints related to consultation, stakeholder engagement, and FPIC. Just a quick note, I will be focusing in a public sector case, not directly or not squarely focused on FPIC, but on stakeholder engagement and on consultation in general. But I'll be glad to take any particular comments or consultations regarding FPIC in Latin America and the Caribbean if that's of interest of the participants. The project that I'm going to be sharing is a project in Ecuador. It's the program for the reconstruction of electricity infrastructure that was affected by an earthquake in 2016. On April 16, 2016, Ecuador was struck by an earthquake of 7.8 degrees in the Richter scale, which is the strongest earthquake recorded in the country since 1979. The epicenter of the earthquake was the province of Manabí, and it affected several cities and communities, especially resulting in fatalities, severe damage to infrastructure related to electricity, drinking water, health, and education services. The loan amount by the IDB was approximately $70 million, and the goal of the project was to improve the electricity service by rebuilding electricity infrastructure that was affected by the earthquake. The executing agency was the Ministry of Energy and Non-Renewable Natural Resources, with the technical assistance and actually implementation of the project by the state-owned company utility Corporación Nacional de Electricidad, CNEL. The request was filed on April 27, 2018. It refers to a sub-project in the main program. That is the reconstruction and relocation of 9 kilometers of the San Vicente Jama subtransmission line. It was filed by 547 residents of 8 communities in the province of Manabí, Ecuador. And they alleged that the proposed relocation of those 9 kilometers of the subtransmission line implies that line would run along the Spondiles route. That is a road that connects San Vicente, Canoa, and some other semi-urban parts of Manabí, for which its population is mostly reliant on tourism. So the allegations that they raised when they filed the complaint was that this new route would obstruct an evacuation, the evacuation routes of the area, given that that area is highly prone to earthquakes, landslides, and other natural phenomena. Also, that it would impact negatively impact on tourist activity in the area, as well as generate adverse effects on the health of people living near the subtransmission line, and impact on flora, fauna, and particularly protected species. And regarding the main element that was the core of this session, they alleged a lack of public consultation. according to the requesters, the consultation and socialization events were not targeted enough and did not include necessarily the directly affected people by the project. They said that the relocation had been determined without a public hearing to properly analyze alternatives to the route proposed by the government and without an environmental and social impact study. Well, actually, what the requesters said is that the environmental impact study showed some alternatives, but that was done late in the project, not when the project was actually designed, but when the project had already started being implemented. And that a geological study that they thought was key to the decision was not conducted with the environmental impact assessment study. The perception of the requesters was that the executing agency had already selected and settled for one route for the subtransmission line. And according to them, this became sort of an obstacle to consider or creatively think about other alternative ways to implement the project. So what you can see here is the red line is the subtransmission line original route, and the dotted yellow line was the proposed relocation of the line near the coast and also through all that route that connects San Vicente to Queroma. I'll come back to this slide at some point. Some context that it's important to think about consultation. What you're seeing in the picture right there is the Spondylus route, and what you're seeing is the mountain right next to the line. Right next to the road where the line would be running through. So the conflict started in early 2017 when the requesters learned about the project and they began airing their concerns about it, mainly those 4 big elements that I shared with you a couple of minutes later. The executing agency, CNL, they carried out a series of activities to inform the public about the program. And as part of those activities, they held a meeting in September 2017, which was attended by requesters, local authorities, and of course, the executing agency. In this meeting, most of the community shared their doubts about the relocation that was proposed by SNL, and they agreed to conduct a technical and cost assessment for alternative routes, as well as a geological study that would show the stability of the embankment of the route. That is what you see in the picture. Once that assessment of the alternative routes was presented, the requesters highly and strongly criticized the quality and the depth of the analysis conducted by the consulting firm that Senado hired. And they nonetheless expressed that only 2 out of the 4 alternatives that were investigated or analyzed actually took into account their preferences and concerns. And of the 4 options, they favored those 2. The main options for them was to keep the subtransmission line in the current location while upgrading the infrastructure. At every point they realized that the project was needed, but they were arguing about the location. And the second alternative for the communities was, okay, if you want to set that through the main artery, through the main route that connects these villages, the cities, do it underground. So just put the subtransmission line underground and we'll be fine with that. According to Senel, they analyzed those different options with a variety of variables such as economic, social, environmental, and technical issues. And the executing agency said that one main factor that included that drove their idea of relocation was the existence of access roads that would allow them to perform maintenance and other necessary tasks when natural disasters occur. And they say that having had those maintenance routes already settled, that would have been key to help prevent or mitigate the damage suffered by during and after the 2016 earthquake, because the current route was highly inaccessible. So according to requesters, as I said, the community engagement did not reach the affected people. And finally, CNL was selected the idea of keeping the line, of moving the line towards the route against the concerns and the let's say and against those two options that the community favored. So after a quite long process of assessment that was extended 2 times to give the bank, the public sector of the IDB, the chance to address some of the concerns with the requesters, we concluded that there were conditions to initiate the process, and we conducted 3 plenary dialogue sessions, 3 structured dialogue sessions, and several bilateral meetings throughout the process. During the first of those sessions, CNL presented a proposal for a solution or a resolution to the problem identified in the request, mainly based on the findings of that geological study that was not conducted prior to the environmental impact assessment. And that geological study pointed out the risks of rerouting the subtransmission line along the highway between San Vicente and Canoa due to the instability of the roadside embankment, which was one of the main allegations of the requesters when they complained about the relocation route in those public hearings. So a partial agreement was reached. In this first session, we sometimes work with the idea of partial agreements to get to a final agreement at some point. That is what we did here. And the key elements of that partial agreement was to maintain the current route of the subtransmission line until bypassing Canoa. So 7 of the 9 kilometers would be the same as they were already installed at that time. The parties agreed to a technical study. To study the technical options to address the how can I say the situation of a dwelling, a family that was in a place called La Fortuna, was living right under the current subtransmission line, and the family alleged that they had suffered severe health impacts because of living below the transmission line. Also, in that first partial agreement, CNL committed to prepare and submit a study. Actually, that was more a technical report to the parties with electromechanical designs for this new repowering and maintenance of the subtransmission line. Sessions 2 and 3 were mostly focused on sharing information on the progress of those commitments made at the first session and identifying next steps, where CNL also presented the options to implement the project without cutting off the electricity of the electricity supply to the population that was receiving its power from the current subtransmission line. Also, CNL shared that electronic mechanical design, and they explained the specifics about the work to be performed. And all of those processes involved a lot of conversations between the parties to improve that, to improve the plan and the project that CNL was carrying on in Manabi. So finally, we reached to an agreement in that third session, a final agreement in that third session. And I would say that the 2 key main elements of that agreement was the implementation of repowering and maintenance work on the San Vicente Jama subtransmission line that would maintain, of course, the original route until Canoa, and that this work would have to be done with the line disconnected from power. That's what they call working with the line in cold, and that would mean ending another subtransmission line and substation that was being built. So that delayed a little bit the implementation of our agreement. The parties also agreed to relocate the electric tower that was in the property of this family in La Fortuna, this change of location would actually improve the situation of the family, because it would be a higher station that would be like 6 to 9 meters to the northeast part away from their property, and a much higher infrastructure. And that would be in accordance with the IDB safeguards as well as current environmental laws in Ecuador. And the second key element of the agreement was stakeholder awareness and information disclosure. The parties agreed that all of the documents that we produce and use during the consultation phase would be made public, and that includes, of course, the environmental impact study, the geological and geotechnical study, the electromechanical design. Everything that we used was set to be public. And the parties also agreed that CNL would conduct a series of socializing events and in order to engage with owners of the land over the existing road was routed, and the presentation of the technical study, the electromechanical design, and everything. And 4 key aspects, and with this, I will give the floor to Katia. I would say I would try to make like small comments. The 4 key aspects that I think that the DR process gave us is that we sought at every time, at every point, to create a safe space for airing these concerns raised through the request. And to do so, we had to establish a threshold, a minimum level of trust between the parties, so that information could be shared and different opinions weighted to address the issues that were raised in the complaint. And also, we really took into consideration the necessity to address the asymmetries between the parties. Our requesters were a big group, mostly of very poor people, but they were also not all of them Spanish speakers. So it was a group in Ecuador, but they were led by a Ukrainian family with American also people that were living there, and a huge group of Ecuadorian people. So building some sets of abilities was key to help them go through the dialogue. And we did that through different measures, but facilitation was key, one of them. The use of technical studies was a fundamental element to reach a consensus, and they basically allow the parties to understand and inform the process and consensus building. And of course, the active and sustained participation of IDB management, the executive agency, and the requesters were fundamental. And they gave a sense of legitimacy to the process and allowed us to reach a solid agreement. And we're currently closing that case in the next couple of days with an agreement that has been fully implemented. So we're very happy about it, and I think that would be all from my end, Paco. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin, for sharing this success story. I will hand it over to your colleague now, Katia Raya. Katia?
Good morning, everyone. I am here on behalf of Katia Araya, MICI's Compliance Review Phase Coordinator. My name is Maria Elisa Dugo. I am the phase case analyst. I've been working at MICI for the last 3 years. I will share my screen in a moment. Thank you so much for the invitation, and so nice to meet you all. Just a moment, please. Can you see it now?
Now we see it, yes.
Okay. Great. So, bueno, it is a pleasure to be with you today to talk about lessons learned from the Mareña renewables case in Mexico, reinforcing the meaningful in meaningful consultation. For the Inter-American Development Bank, this case and MICI's investigation marked an institutional turning point, as it enabled the bank, or supported the process, to improve meaningful consultations and their contextual risk analysis in projects. But what was this project about? The IDB financed Mareña Renewables project in the state of Oaxaca, Mexico, was supposed to be the largest wind farm in Latin America and will produce almost 400 megawatts of clean energy with the 132 wind turbines, 3 substations, and 52 kilometers of transmission lines. In case you're curious why I said that it was supposed to be and about what finally happened with the project, I have to tell you that the increased opposition from local communities, inflamed by some operational challenges, drove international investors off and derailed the project. But let's focus on the MICI process. In December 2012, Indigenous communities residing in several villages of the Istmo of Tehuantepec, where the project was located, filed a complaint to MICI. The complaint highlighted the following issues. First, an inappropriate assessment of the adverse effects impacting the Indigenous community. Second, harm to the lifestyle of Indigenous communities and their traditions. Third, an environmental harm to the maritime fauna and the migratory birds in the area. Also, insufficient information sharing with the communities about the potential impact, meaning a lack of adequate public consultation. And finally, actual and potential harm to their traditional livelihood activities, in this case, fishing. So consequently, MICI conducted an independent investigation known as compliance review phase to determine whether the bank complied with its social and environmental standards regarding the harms alleged in the complaint. So let's talk about the investigation findings. What did MICI find? The main findings were the following. First, the consultation process was culturally inappropriate and not sensitive to the social cultural context. Then, the conflicted context was not timely identified. And finally, the disclosure of environmental and social information was incomplete. But what does this mean regarding compliance with the bank's environmental and social policies? So let's see. 3 policies were not observed. Here it is important to note that currently IDB Invest, the private sector of the IDB group, and IDB have different normative frameworks for environmental and social management. Well, as Angela Miller explained for the IDB Invest, but here are the policies not observed that were in place at the moment of the case. And for this case, the non-compliance with the policies were: first, environmental and safeguard compliance, the OP 703, which determined the process for identifying and managing environmental and social risks and the requirements for public consultations. Then the access to information policy, OP 102, which provides for the environmental and social documentation, disclosure requirements, among others. And finally, the Indigenous Peoples Policies, OP 765, that determines the process to be conducted for socially adequate consultation and free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous people. So after determining these non-compliances, what did MICI recommend? Here we have a picture about a gathering with women and meeting. The recommendations. So what did MICI recommend? First, to underscore the importance of having a solid capacity for the assessment of social impact and enhance the framework of the operational policies in their social perspective. MICI recommended to include a timeline for the disclosure of documents and clarify the disclosure of the frameworks for environmental and social assessment and management. Also, to perform an audit of the bank's disclosure practices. Moreover, to revise and update the language in policy of indigenous peoples and strengthen the management capacity in the area. Finally, a guidance on how the bank should operate in the presence of significant environmental and social conflicts in case the bank's response capacity. So, the findings and recommendations made by MICI resulted in concrete changes within the IDB. On what? On procedural, policies, and even at an operational level. Many of the changes derived from the Malenia case and have contributed to the creation of the new environmental and social policy framework, which became effective on November 1st, 2021. But what were these changes? Well, first of all, a restructuring of the environmental and safeguards units, ESG, to strengthen the management of social impact and contextual risk. So this was the institutional change, because the lesson learned was that meaningful, that stronger focus on social issues was necessary, and a proactive effort were needed to systematically identify contextual risk and prevent projects from contributing or exacerbating social conflicts. Second, there was creation on technical notes and courses for IDB specialists and executing agencies on meaningful stakeholder engagement and social impact assessment. So one of the technical notes was about meaningful stakeholder consultation, and the other one was specifically about social impact assessment. So the third change was changes in internal processes and modifications to information systems to ensure disclosure of environmental and social documentation. Also, a preliminary gap analysis of the IDB's indigenous people was conducted in 2017. And finally, many of the changes derived from the Malenia case have contributed, as I said, to the creation of the new environmental social policy framework. Finally, some testimonies, some quotes from the parties involved in the case, management and the complainant's representative. First, we have Janine Ferretti, the ESG chief between 2003 and 2019. She said that what the case brought to the forefront was the need to include contextual risk analysis and the assessment process. Then we have Leonardo Tripa, a complainant's representative, who said that the case highlighted the importance of including the affected communities from the beginning of the project cycle. And finally, we have Marcelo Serna, its information chief, who said that Malenia has been an invaluable source of learning that has centered the IDB's commitment to support projects that promote environmental and social sustainability. So, thank you for your time. I look forward to continue this conversation, and if you have any questions, thank you so much.